Hello, everyone, and welcome to another exciting edition of Adobe Live. It's a pretty great day here today, but we're going to see some wonderful work here from our special guest today, which is Matthias. Hi, Matthias.
Hello, Robert. Thank you for a nice introduction. Really nice to be here. Although not the first time at Adobe Live, it's the first time at Adobe UK. So hello, everyone in the chat. Hello, everyone watching. In case you don't know me, my name is Matthias de Cillia. I'm a digital designer with focus on motion and CGI design, and I'm based in Austria. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to round up the 3D week this week and dive into some Stager stuff today.
Absolutely. I've known Matthias for quite a while now. We were actually discussing a couple of projects pre-stream that we've collaborated on, or at least worked on both, but on different times. And we just found out that it's been 5 years. So it's crazy how time flies. And Matthias is a fantastic artist. He's a little humble. So give him some love in the chat. I appreciate his first time being in the UK stream. So let's broaden the audience to his wonderful work and skills. And speaking of audience, let's see who is in the chat. I see Sandrine, Kemal, Gareth, Linda, Sean, Oliver, Angus. Hey, Tim is there. Wow, Doris. So hello, everyone tuning in online. It's good to see you all. Thank you all also to tuning in on the previous streams. And in case you're wondering where it is best to watch it, if you're watching it on YouTube, feel free to hop on over to Behance, because there you can, of course, post any questions, comments, feedback, anything that you like. I'll monitor that and pass it on to Matthias, and we can chat and keep it a little bit interactive. So today is going to be pretty packed. We have 1.5 hours full of 3D content, and I can't wait for Matthias to get started. So what are we going to see today from you?
So today we are going to work on a nice abstract 3D scene. And in case you want to follow along on my Behance page, that is probably going to post it now in the stream or on the chat, you can see here the project that we are going to look at today. That you've been working on already on Monday. Karina, we've been working on Monday, and you yesterday, and I'll finish it today with Stager. And if you want to follow along, just feel free to open it up, scrub through the project, and we're going to create this scene today. And to give a little bit of perspective what Stager is, because that's the main program we're using today after Aero on Monday, and yesterday was, I think, Sampler, Painter, and also a little bit of Stager, but today is the main focus on Stager. And to give you a little bit of an insight where Stager comes inside a usual pipeline or workflow, or was it generally used for, I've prepared a little graphic for you today. So usually Stager is, like the name already says, a program that lets you stage and a scene with different assets, materials, create lighting, a backdrop scene where basically it all comes together with all your models, textures, lighting. And usually it's the last stage that lets you render a final 2D image that you can further manipulate in your favorite post-production software like Photoshop or After Effects. And sometimes it can be a little bit tricky or overwhelming which program from the Substance Suite to use when. So I've created this little overview. So basically, first, you need models. So you start modeling in Modeler, or also I think a recent update has brought creating parametric objects into Designer, but I'll go into that a little bit later what parametric objects are. So first you create your 3D object, then you bring it into a sampler, designer, or painter like you did yesterday, where you create materials in sampler, bring it into Painter, paint it on your 3D objects, create some weathered edges, bring life into the object. And then when everything is textured, and although you're already using some lighting or HDRIs inside these programs, it's usually not for your final product. It's more like a work in progress preview, how your materials would look like inside certain lighting environments. So after that, you bring your model into Stager, render it, add the final lighting, add the final scene, and then render it out into 2D image. Yeah.
That's a very good point with the lighting. I'm not sure if I made it exactly clear yesterday, but it's actually pretty crucial to understand that, for one, if you are photographing, let's say, the pavement or any other texture that I used yesterday, usually it has a light direction, right? So it will cast shadows, depending on where the sun is. And ideally it's overcast, so it's like a dim light, not too bright, like a flat light. But also you can, for example, if you are taking photos of, let's say, a leather pattern or anything that you can photograph in a close-up, you can do multiple exposures or multiple photos with different light directions, and you can tell a substance sampler to delight the scene. So basically you take away the light and take away the shadows, most importantly. Why? Because it is you, the creative, that wants to define where the light will be in your 3D scene. So if you say the light is on the left, but on the texture, the light is actually from the right, then the shadows are not going to match up and it's going to look wonky. So that's why it is important to delight the texture. But also, as you mentioned, keep in mind that all the lighting that you see in tools like Painter and Sampler and so on is, like you said, only a preview, and you can always swap it out to a different background. It is only for you to test it in different scenarios, but the final lighting that you will actually render is happening, in example, in Stager, if you're using this to basically stage and finish your render.
Yeah, exactly. And also that is just a suggestion here to what a usual workflow inside the Substance Suite could look like. Of course, programs like Sampler or Painter could be used in another way, or in combining with 3D Party, other programs like Cinema 4D or Maya or something like that. And also, like we will use today, only Stager, where you can also create some basic 3D elements, also import, as we discussed right now, materials, models, etc. So see that just as an overview, like how you could use the different programs inside the Substance Suite, but feel free to use it as you like. So just to give an idea how it would look like. Yeah. So to maybe take a step back before we dive into Stager, regarding our project today. So
quick question to the audience. I would be curious to see and hear who has used any of the Substance tools before, and especially Stager. Maybe you can let me know in the comments. That would be just interesting to see. All right, carry on.
Yeah, really nice to know, because it's relatively new to the Adobe Suite. So it would be interesting to know who's already using it. So earlier this week, Melanie, you and I discussed how we could create a nice project and brainstormed. And after a brainstorm, we decided to go for a nice reduced 3D scene where the main theme was like forced perspective. For anybody who doesn't know what forced perspective means, it's basically something that forces you to go into a certain perspective to see how it really should look like. Otherwise, it's like an abstract scene or just something that doesn't make really sense. So after we had our main theme set, we decided, okay, how would the scene look like? What is the mood? So we created a mood board where we found some really nice themes that we liked, like reduced color palette with monochromatic colors into the blues and greens, because our theme was also Earth Day. So it really fitted the theme, and we decided to use simplified 3D models. So it's really reduced. And also what I really like, what I showed today, is that you don't have to be afraid maybe when you haven't used 3D programs before and are a designer. And so I want to smooth that pathway a little bit and maybe give an idea how you can also create with really simple elements a nice scene and make it pop with lighting and materials. and maybe with a little bit of post-production in Photoshop. So maybe this gives you a glimpse of how you could create your own 3D scene for the first time. So these nudes are really helped us to create a first scribble that Melanie did. With also, we want to integrate some type elements to move the force perspective forward to give it a little bit of sense when you are right in the right perspective, so you can see the typography elements the correct way. And after that, I've started creating a scene in Stager, and that's where we're gonna end up today. So
it's very nice. I remember quite fondly when we were sitting together in Austria brainstorming and you know, throwing around all those ideas with force perspective and typography and design and 3D, and like everything had to be crammed into this artwork, and it was just so much fun to do. Although I remember that we had even more ideas, so we should pick them up maybe sometime soon for new stuff.
Yeah, there will be another stream, I think. It wasn't possible to cram all the stuff in, but I think it was already lots of stuff. So I think we did a pretty good job. But
absolutely, it was so nice to work with you guys,
especially with maybe animation or even with the interactive stuff on Monday with the arrow. That's also what this scene maybe looks a little bit not dull, but what I think what gives it a little extra is the interactivity when you have the force perspective and the possibility to move around and explore the different angles and see when it's really how it's supposed to be. So although that's a real nice image per se, but I think the interactivity, or maybe later when we animate something or make it maybe in real for an art exhibition or something like that. So that's where it really shines.
I'm curious on how many people actually realize that this image actually says Earth Day, because it's quite abstract, obviously. But if you squint your eyes, then you will actually discover that it says Earth Day. So maybe some people were just looking at it as, something else. But so yeah, I'm curious if there's going to be anyone raising his virtual hand, saying like, "Oh, right." Maybe everyone saw it. I don't know. Melanie is excited. She has just arrived in the chat. So did Joe, as well as Karina, who all were part of the stream and the work. So hello, everyone, tuning in.
So yeah, as you said, it's even if you know the words, it's kind of difficult to find out. But that was also kind of part of our concept, where we wanted the user to discover it and maybe take a second look, because often design is nice, but after the first time you look at it, it kind of gets boring or you're used to it. So this gives us another dimension, I think, where you can take another look, even if it's not interactive, and maybe discover some objects you haven't seen before, or the type elements like E, A, R, T, like this tree is, only if you know, I think, what it's spelling, you will find out that it's actually T. But yeah, a really nice scene, I think.
And for the we were lazy for the D and for the H.
Yeah, I think I think you need some hints at least.
Yeah.
Because it is everything. If everything is like something like that A or so, it really gets difficult. But I think we needed some cheap ways to give the viewer a little hint.
Oliver is being honest. He says he only saw idn, which is EDNH. But now that you've said it, he can see it. So
like
that's,
that, yeah.
That's a win.
At least he saw some letters. So
cool. So that is out of the way. So let's jump into the tools.
Yes. So let's open up Stager and give a little bit of overview. First up, I'm going to give you an introduction to the interface a little bit. And what I really like about Stager is when you're first diving into a 3D program for the first time and you're used to the Adobe suite like Photoshop, After Effects, Illustrator, you get pretty familiar with the interface pretty quick, because it's built up in the same way as far as it's possible. So you start here with the Start tab, where you can create a new scene, get some tutorials, open up recent files, and of course, we are going to create now a new scene. And then you jump over into the design mode. Because Stager has two modes. Design mode is where most of your editing takes place, where you import your models, set the lighting, set the cameras, really finesse your scene and composition. And after that is finished, we'll come to that later, you get into the render part where you finally render your final image, get a 2D image like a PNG or a Photoshop file, and yeah, get the final image. So here on the left, you have the toolbar, like in most Adobe programs. Right to that, you have the assets panel, where I find all your different assets ranging from models to materials to lights, and also images that you can use, for example, as backgrounds, or even as textures or maps as a roughness map, or we'll come to that later. And right below that, you have the project materials. It gets a bit more clear later. It's every material that you are currently using in the scene gets put here. So you have an overview which materials are already used. Here in the scenes panel, you have all the different objects that are already in your scene. So it's kind of like your layers panel or something like that in Photoshop, where you have an overview which is used. You can group stuff, move around, select stuff. And when you select something, the actions panel shows you the different options that you can specifically make for that object or model. And below that is also the properties panel that changes depending on which object you have selected. But that gets clear in a moment when we start modeling our scene.
Matthias, is there any particular relevance in terms of the scene layer order? Like what is on top of each other, or is it completely random, or just your structural organization method?
That's a really good point, because that's different to the Photoshop layer panel, where when something is on top of something, it really is on top of it and cuts it out, kind of. Here, it's just for organization, where you can group stuff, move it around, because when here really counts in the viewport, the main panel, if it is in 3D space in front of something or behind something. So it doesn't really matter if it's in the scene panel, if it's above, below, it's just for organization purposes. Very good question, yeah. So maybe we start building our scene. So to take a look back at the scribble, I decided, so this was just a starting point where Melanie gave us some ideas how we could create some basic shapes for our typography or additional graphical elements. So I really like the idea of this kind of arch thing for the A. So then you have to get a little bit creative when we only want to use assets inside Stager. And what I want to first start is with the basic shapes, because when you scroll down, you have also some other more advanced shapes, but we come to that later. So we'll start simple. And now I want to start with cylinder, because I want to create this A shape. And there are different options how you can put it into your viewport. Either you just press it, then it gets into the center of your scene, or you can also just drag it in, drop. Now your object is into the scene. And talking about the 3D scene, it's also really important, I think, as a first step when you're starting with 3D objects and 3D programs, that you get used to the shortcuts, how to move around in 3D space and also how to move around objects in 3D space. So there are basically 3 ways you can move around in 3D space. When you hold Option and click the left mouse button, you can orbit around something. When I hold Alt and Option, and the middle mouse, you can orbit. When I Alt and right click, you can dolly or zoom an object. So just press the button Option and move around with left, right, and middle mouse click. That's really important, because when you starting out and for every move you have to change the tool here, it really slows down your work in progress, and also your creative thinking, I think. So get this down in the beginning. It really helps your working process.
Matthias, did you mention, or did sorry, I didn't quite pay attention because I was answering a couple of questions here in the chat. Does the F key work here as well with the focus?
Yes.
Did you mention that?
Not already, but
okay.
But a good point, if you're kind of lost and don't know where you are, or maybe the camera is a little bit pointing in the wrong direction, you can select an object and press F to focus on that. You can also select multiple objects, focus on the whole scene. So that brings it back if you get lost in the beginning. That's a good point, because that's often sometimes when you're not really used to navigating in a 3D world, that really helps in the beginning. And also some very good shortcuts are the transformation shortcuts, because when you select the object, you see here you have lots of tools available, and basically there are 3 different forms. There's movement, rotation, maybe that one, rotation, and scale. Oh, this one. And maybe that's a good point. Now I'm scaling only in one axis, but if you want to change the axis mode, you can change from object world space, and now it's changing the whole object, not just in one axis, depending on how you want to scale it. Maybe you just want to change the height, or maybe the width, or maybe the whole object. You can change that also with the shortcut T. And yeah, but let's create a new cylinder, because I want it to be perfectly round at the top. So these 3 the transformation modes can also be accessed via shortcuts. So really good option if you can use those. So W is for movement, E is for rotation, and R is for scale. And I'll be using those that stream today. So if you're wondering what is happening here, if this is changing, it's just me pressing the 3 buttons to transform the different tools. So yeah, so back to our A. Now when we have our cylinder selected, we have here in the properties some different options how we can change our cylinder. Because it's a cylinder, it's a parametric object that we can see here on this little icon. We have still values that we can change to change the object despite just moving it around or scaling it. So I want to change the radius here, so maybe to something like 4. And then I just can copy it with Command C, Command V, move it to the side. It's rotated, I think. I don't want that. So perfect. Copy and paste it. Move it around. It's the old one. Now
it's slightly off from the Z value.
Yeah, it's still. But doesn't really matter, because
it has to be perfect.
It has to be nice. Because I dragged it in, that's the reason why. So now I can copy and paste it like in any other program with Command C, Command V. I can see it's here, the second cylinder. And now I want to create the arc above it. So I'm gonna drag a torus here. And if you see it, if you drag it here, it snaps kind of on the edges of already created assets. I want to drop it here so it has the right height. Now I'm rotating it. And now it's still not really just half an arc, but in this properties for the object, for the torus, we have the option to slice it. So we can change the angle, how I want to slice it. So I'm going to use 180, just roll it around, holding Shift. You can use the tools in increments. So it's rotating in 5 degree steps. So you get the perfect 100 degree. And also maybe I want to use the same radius as the cylinder. So I'm going to select 4. And now what also important, here you have the snap tool. It's like the smart guides, a snap tool also in Illustrator or something, where you can snap your objects on existing. You can see it here. It gets highlighted on existing meshes or other stuff, so it fits perfectly. So now it's snapped here, and now I want to snap that on that one. Perfect. And now I just move it up, and we have our first letter.
Snapping is super useful in 3D space because you're always like, okay, it looks perfect maybe from one angle, but if you rotate around, all of a sudden it's like complete mess. So snapping is absolutely helpful.
Yeah, exactly. It really, sometimes, as you said, it looks perfect, but then you rotate around and it's somewhere in the back or something.
Yep.
And now to keep track of things and keep it organized, what I like to do is grab all these elements that I have here, or I can also use the select tool and drag it over them and use Command G to group it. So as I said, it doesn't change something in the viewport, but it changes my organization. So I can call it now A, and also I can use the group and move all of it around. So that's also very practical. So I'll move that up front. And now we have our first letter, and maybe let's see what we'll create next. And we created some like stages or little blocks where something is standing on. So maybe let's create that with the with the cube object. I'm also drag it in. And as I discussed, mentioned earlier, we can scale it when we are in the object mode, scale it just upwards. Maybe move it around a bit, copy and paste, scale a little bit like that. Maybe a bit more width to it. Copy and paste it again. Maybe move it forward, scale it down. So we get a nice scenery here in the back where you can place things on top. So now the A is maybe a little bit too big. So we can select the whole A, can use the R shortcut and scale it down a little bit, maybe move it forward. Okay. So another nice object is the text object, because when you drag it in here, maybe here, you can get in the object's properties, it's still editable text. So I can type here whatever I want in whatever type you want, but Arial is actually very fine because it's kind of bold, and you can change it later. Always, it's always live. You can ED, whatever, change or play around with the parameters down here, maybe increase the depth a bit. And also, good point here now is the bevel, because as you mentioned yesterday already, in the 3D world, when you create something, it's kind of perfect, especially the edges.
Yes.
And you don't have that in the real world per se, because nothing is really perfect. So when you add a bevel to it, it rounds the edges, maybe decrease the width a little bit. And so you get like a more natural organic form where also you catch a little bit of light, of reflections, and it gets a less 3D looking thing, more a natural looking scene. So that's
like it instantly looks better, you know, like just catching that glimpse of light. If you turn it off, you know, it looks completely, you know, like, I don't know, not high quality, but as soon as you add bevel, if you compare it, for example, to the cubes next to it, you can see that it completely stands out. And even, you know, even to the other elements. One quick question, Matthias, I'm just curious.
Yes.
Can you change the text to be like an object, so you can also bool it?
I'm not sure if bools are available in Stager, but as far as I know, you can.
Or transform it to become a non text object? I mean, it's not important. I'm just curious. I just had this inkling.
Yeah, there is an option. I'm looking for it. I think it's here. Yeah. So after when you're like done, or you're sure you don't want to change it, like the text is fixed. And also that's a great point for exporting, because I exported all the different models for Aero for the scene Karina used on Monday. And usually when it's still a parametric object, Aero or other programs don't really know how to handle it. So when you're exporting, it's always good to use, like when you're using a text object, to convert it to a standard model. And now here's this new cube item. And now you see all the options are gone, where you can change text, change the extrusion. You can still manipulate it in the way we did with some standard models. You can scale it, you can rotate it, but the other parameters are gone and you're stuck with that. But it's way better for interaction with other programs.
Cool.
So let's move that here. And as you saw here, you can also use the bevel on other object, not just the text object. You can use it on cubes. You can use it also on here, but you have to go inside and select the cylinder directly. You can use the bevel. I won't do it with every object, as it takes a lot of time, but you can do it basically with everyone to give it a nice little edge everywhere. So maybe going beyond the basic shapes, I'll show you some models in the menu down below where they get more complex. And what I wanted to use here is, like, from the high cube here, like using a stair down here. Unfortunately, here in the stager comes packed with lots of parametric objects that you can import directly here. And also I didn't import any of that. So it's integrated into stager. And oh, that's a bit big when you import it. So now I have some stairs. And the cool thing, like with the text here, is that you can still manipulate the parameters inside the objects. You can change the number of stairs, change the height, the width, the depth. So that's really, really cool. And that's also what I mentioned earlier when in the pipeline with, I think, Designer, the Substance program. You can create such 3D parametric models that you can later import and still change on the fly when you're working inside a 3D program. And that makes it really nice, because usually the workflow is you create a 3D model, it's fixed. You think, okay, that would look like nice in a scene, but then you import and maybe think, oh, maybe that tree needs a little more branches, or that stair, maybe a little bit more steps. And so it's really nice and art directable still in the program without really getting back into the other program, create it again, import it again. So it's really nice to have the flexibility directly here in the programs that these stager models and substance models bring with it.
Tim added a comment, which is that escalated quickly.
Do that. So I'll make that a little bit smaller.
And people are adding to that. They say one step at a time. It's fun time. Fun time is fun time.
So let's add some bevel here as well. Maybe a bit too rounded here. Okay. So maybe another interesting parametric object would be, as you see here, maybe this tree here, this palm tree. It also comes directly inside Stager. I can drop that here. Now you see it doesn't really look like the tree in our final image. That's because, again, it's a parametric object where the creator of this object made this available to change between looks of the palm tree. So you can change the leaves, change the height, the leaf amount, the bending angle of the object, the padding, how much it goes down, or maybe just upside. I just use it like that, so it looks more like a T. You can change base scale, etc. And that's really nice. And I wasn't really used to that, to change models on the fly like that. So that's really, really convenient when working on especially scenes like that. So
yeah, that's a very good point, because for us that are used to work with rather more complex tools like Cinema 4D, which can do more, but by being able to do more, it is also more complicated in some way, although it is still one of the rather easier programs. But the speed and quickness that you can use Stager for certain elements is quite amazing, I think. Especially the parametric stuff is like, it's pretty mind-blowing on how fast you can adjust and manipulate the objects to your liking.
Yeah, exactly. And that's also, I think, why it's a really good program when you're trying to start out into 3D, maybe dive into how to position an object, maybe a little bit of rendering, a bit of lighting, not modeling per se, but using objects. And because it's also, maybe for some, it's a little bit overwhelming with all the panels, but as you said, other programs like Cinema 4D or Maya or something are way more complex, and I think it's really more satisfying if you're starting out with something like that and really get a glimpse of what is really possible with 4D programs
and get results quite early on, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because with other programs, you need to watch hour-long tutorials or don't even know how to render out something because it's something inside free menus. You have to go down and find a special button. So really refreshing to have a program like that where you can really get with
absolutely
relatively simple steps, really nice results. And also it's not like it's not as powerful in the rendering process as other programs. When you render it out, you can really get nice results with the textures and materials. So not really cut downs on that part. So really recommend if you want to try it out and are maybe a designer and didn't do 3D stuff before. So feel free to just open it, drop in some stuff like I do now and play around with it a little bit to get a nice scene or compositing. And it's a really fun 3D program for me. So here's to that. So what else can we? So now we used lots of objects that are inside Stager, but I would also want to give you an idea of you can use other objects that are not available inside. Like, for example, the objects that you created yesterday, I could import here. But what I want to import is this little curly thing here. Because I
think like a spring.
Ah, yeah, spring. Spring is a good word for that in English. So I have created inside another program, exported it. So you know that is possible as well. You can just...
So the so-called Kringel.
Yeah, Kringel, genau. And you can just view it here, export it in OBJ. On Mac, you can preview it with the space key. And really nice that you can just drag and drop your objects. And now I think it's like the stairs really, really big. So we'll press F again, like you mentioned before, to get a nice overview and focus on the object. And now it's really, really big. So, wrong space. Again, change to world space, scale it down, move up. Maybe move it about here. Scale it down again. Now I want to create the E here, but I really want to use 2 springs. So as I did before, I can just Command C, Command V, copy and paste it, rotate it around. So maybe like that. Let's see if that is about the right angle. No, not really. And here I'm just playing around with the different transformation tools. Move it here.
You got it.
And now the snapping comes in really handy. So yeah, about that. From the top, maybe. A little bit down. Now it snaps. Perfect. And now I select.
That's a nice kringle.
We call it spring. Kringle.
Kringle spring.
And now as I grouped it, I can move it simultaneously, move it around. So I have the middle part of the E, but now we need the other part. And here, I just got a little bit creative with which objects I'm using here, because although I had the scribble from manually, it wasn't really possible to use because I wanted to use mainly stager objects that are already built in and not too much of imported objects, so you can really follow along with the project. I tried to get creative to get this E shape without using, again, just cubes moving around, a little bit boring. So I found here this wall object that when, let's move it up a bit. Where is it? Also very big. So let's scale it down. So here you have also the options to change the different parameters here. So I kind of used it to get something like a base for an E shape. Very, very abstract, but it shows the point. So now in object mode, I can scale it like that. Change to world mode to scale it like that. Move it here. And now I want to play around with the forced perspective thing. So I don't want to really have it just hanging around here so you can immediately see that this is an E. So maybe just move it a bit forward, that when you're in the right perspective later, you can see that this is an E.
Matthias, there's a question from
Yes.
Angus. He asked, is it possible to create a stroke, so no fill, he's thinking of text or shape with just a stroke thickness, similar to a wireframe, but as an object?
Directly, I think not, but you can texture it in a way that you have just a stroke. Does it mean like an outline of the object, or like the wireframe highlighted?
I think he means like the wireframe highlighted, more like actually, if you would look at the D, it would be like the outline of the D itself, but not filled, but just with lines around it. You know what I mean? I think if I understand it correctly, that's what he meant.
I'm not sure if there's a shader that is capable of showing the wireframe, but what you could do is create a texture that mimics like a wireframe. Usually there are options that you can render really the wireframe, but here I'm not sure if the inside stager, if the...
It's a tricky one, because...
it's a tricky one.
Yeah, I'm not sure how you would do that here with the options that you have.
But somehow it is possible, even maybe with a little workaround where you put it inside the texture or... So, okay, so maybe now you have a basic idea of how to model a scene, adding elements, because as you can see here, All the other stuff are just basic elements made inside of Stager. Also, this is just, for example, a sliced up cone. We have a little bit get creative to get like these shapes, or this maybe is interesting, the triangle, because it's maybe not what you think of immediately because there's not a triangle in here. But if you use a cylinder, and here you can select the sides. It's basically the resolution of a mesh or the 3D object. And here it goes down. And if you pull it all the way down, you can get like the lowest resolution possible for something like a cylinder. So if you scale that down, you have something of a triangle extruded 3D shape.
That's a great hack, by the way. I didn't think of that.
That's why I try to use as much as possible objects inside of Stager. So it really forced me to get a little bit creative to look how I can use it. For example, the cone, as we saw before, is just rotated and then it's sliced up. So slices here, almost all the way, like 3/3 sliced. And then you have like the bottom shape from the front. From here, it looks completely different, but from the front, it works like a rounded shape we have here, together with a sphere, just another basic object that we can drop. Move here. Maybe scale down a bit. And you have kind of something like an R that you can move around again. Yeah, and that's basically how I set up the scene, just building inside stuff of Stager. Also the objects that are not really necessary to create a nice scene here. You can really work within these objects. So, and I think as time is running fast, enough with modeling, because I've prepared something here, the final scene when I'm ready with all the modeling. So you don't have to bore yourself watching me moving around stuff.
Well, you got pretty close.
Yeah, some stuff was missing, I think, but maybe that but it's basically the really simple objects. So just to give an overview of how it looks in the final scene, I just created a ground plane, dropped in a plane, scaled it up, added like a framing, a back wall, a side wall, to give it a nice scenery, added some spheres on the ground and some extra elements. And yeah, and now the next step would be for me is lighting, because there are different workflows you could go. You could first start with texturing and colors, but I like usually to start with lighting, because materials pretty much behave completely different depending on the lighting. So sometimes it's a little back and forth between creating lighting, changing materials. So usually I'm trying to get a sense of what mood I want to create with the light before I dive into materials. So I want to start with that. And for that, firstly, I want to create a camera, because lighting also changes depending on which angle you look at it. So here's a nice really option that you can create a camera from the view you're currently looking in. A camera is just like a snapshot of the view you're currently in the scene. So you have the possibility to later render it out from the camera. Also, you have like a fixed point that you can reference all the time, because you can jump out of the camera, move in, make some edits, and jump back to see how it fits in the whole scene. And so for lighting, I usually like to start with a camera. So I have like a composition I like. Maybe also in the camera, you can get into the object property, change the focal length, maybe something not so wide, so it gets a little more compressed and works with the forced perspective thing.
That's one thing I want to sorry to interrupt you, but that's one thing that I find with a lot of presentations and talks that I do, and also classes about 3D, and that people really usually, like, not usually, but a lot of people are just using whatever is preset as a focal length, right? So for Cinema 4D, I think it's always 36 millimeter, and a friend of mine once said in the presentation, and I kind of like chose to steal or borrow this phrase from him, and he said, you can change the focal length. You don't always have to use the same focal length for every shot that you create. And that is very true, because it is, if you think about it, how essential the focal length is for the actual appearance and design and what you want to communicate with your work. So for example, if you compare it to a camera, you would never just go out and just shoot with, I don't know, with a fisheye, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you wouldn't shoot a portrait with a fisheye, because we would have a nose like this. So every lens has a different purpose, and tells a different story. So think about, just as you said, think about what you want to communicate, and make a deliberate choice in terms of focal length and why you choose this length, because it will absolutely, trigger a different emotion or a different appearance, depending on what you do. For example, if you would go in super wide,
and make something like,
and go down below, this could look like a massive city thing.
mm-hmm.
This tells a completely different story. It's like a person's perspective. But if you do it like super compressed with 80 millimeter, and then maybe from the up, again, it looks totally different. So I always urge everyone, play around with the focal length, because it will directly and very easily actually manipulate what you're trying to tell.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry for this little
really good point. No, really good point, because people really underestimate how the camera can influence the whole mood of the scene, as you said. And that helps me a little bit, because I also come from a little bit more photography background before I went into motion and CGI design. So it really helps also if you go out and just think about framing, because 3D just brings all the different elements together. And just because you're inside a 3D program doesn't mean that you don't have to think about stuff like focal length and perspective. And so, yeah, really good point to add here. So now I'm really happy with the position of the camera. And now let's move forward to, we skip materials because we add that later after lighting, to lights. And now here you have all different kinds of lights that you can use in 3D space. You have like area lights that you can drop here. It's basically like a softbox. Let's see that. Maybe add here. You can rotate these. Oh, is it not lighting? The area light is basically something like a softbox. Let's turn up the intensity. Maybe turn it. But what I usually like is not messing around with these. It can be nice to add some like highlights where you maybe light something that should be more in focus, because you can always mess with single lights like here, or duplicate it, move it. That's the wrong. Duplicate it, move it here, and maybe create manually like a 3-point light setup with a key light, a fill light, and maybe something like a rim light, edge light, where you can really get the edges. But what I really like usually is starting with something like an HDRI image. As you mentioned yesterday already, if you don't know what an HDRI image is, it's like when you're inside a sphere and you have a 360-degree photo that uses its luminance values as a light source. So if we bring in the studio light up here, for example, or maybe the soft boxes, it pops up in the environment object, and we have it now here. And now we'll start with the first time rendering. And rendering ray tracing, just a little heads up, when you activate that, basically what it's doing here, we're just previewing the scene where it can work faster and move objects around. So it's just for work in progress. And when you press ray tracing, the scene is really calculating every single ray or light ray that's bouncing around the scene, bouncing off materials, reflections. So it takes more time, but it gives you the nice final look of the rendering. So especially when you're working with, starting with lighting and materials, it's a good step to turn this up. And now I have added this environment light here. Also here I have the options to rotate the light, maybe change the intensity, rotate the light only itself, because this was like the master rotation where I can rotate all the lights in the scene. And also I can colorize the HDR. And I really like that because I give it for now a neutral touch, make it all black and white, so no colors are yet in the light. And now that's, I think, is a nice fill light, but I want to give it a more harsh look like we have here. Have some harsh shadows, a harsh key light. And one of the best ways to do is you could use a direction light, which is kind of like a sunlight. But I really like the sun object here. And I can click here, and now it's added in the environment object, additionally to the environment light. And now we are not seeing anything because our backdrop is currently blocking it. But if we rotate just the sun objects, we can see how it's coming into the scene slowly. Maybe from this side. Yeah, perfect. So also I want to colorize it so it's more neutral. Maybe I want to change the global rotation with all the lights a little bit, so the ease maybe a little bit in the shadow. And here I'm just fiddling around a little bit, trying out different angles, trying out different stuff until I'm happy. And I think now it's looking pretty good. And you could also dive in more, add some area lights because you want to maybe highlight this object in the back or the age, but I won't go too deep into that as I'm pretty happy how it's looking now. Mm-hmm. And next step when you have the lighting would be materials, for me at least. So here in the materials tab, you have, like with the objects, you have the basic materials and then more advanced materials where we're gonna use later. But first, I'll start with adding a material to all the objects in the scene. I'm pressing Command A to select all the objects, maybe use a matte material. And now it's applied to all the different objects to just give it a starting point where I want to go. And now, I think it was a pretty recent update in
Matthias,
Stagia.
Sorry
Yes.
to interrupt. Where do I see if an object has a material applied? How do I know that?
You have to go onto the object,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's the material tab. And here you can see the material.
Okay.
And now, as I selected all of them, every one has it on here. And also, because I added it everywhere, it's linked. So if I change the color on one object, maybe to give it something like a light blue, all objects change the color because it's already linked. I can break up this link, so it's just material for this single object and to change it therefore in another color or something. But for now, I don't want to do that. And also a new update was here in the project materials. You have an overview of which materials are currently used inside your projects. So if you know that light blue is used on here, you can select it just here and change the properties without selecting an object and change maybe the color And now it's also, because it's linked, changing the material for all the colors. So really, really handy update. Stage I had in a few months ago, I think this summer or so. And yeah, so I kind of like the basic tone now from the scene, and also lighting works great with the matte object, but now I want to get some more variety with colors. So maybe I drag a new material, and as with the objects, I can just drag it into the scene. And as you can see, the object gets highlighted where I want to drop it here. And now an additional material is here. And now also what really great is it's part of the Adobe suite. I can access all my Adobe libraries, because Melanie created a really nice color palette using, I think, the Dachstein, with really nice muted natural colors, and shared with me a color palette inside my Adobe Cloud. And now when I go into the material, I just go into the base color and can pick just the color I want. So, and now if I drag on the material, you see it's exactly the color like that. And maybe let's dive into a little bit of the material behavior, because when you scroll down in a material, you have all the different options how you can manipulate your material. You can change the roughness, for example, how glossy it is, or how clear the reflections are, how metallic the material is, the opacity, is it maybe a little bit translucent, the ambient occlusion, pretty technical stuff, the more far you go down. So I won't dive too deep into that, but if you want to just play around with the normals, with the bumps, the height, the displacement, where you can really dive into deep material stuff, and really powerful tools here. So everything you need for a really great material is possible here. So maybe a little bit less roughness. And now what I really like here is when I say, okay, I like that material, but as we see here, it's used more often in the scene. So I could just drag it, drop, but a really nice tool is the material picker. And if I just, like in Illustrator or something, pick the color or the material and then press Shift and click, I can just drop it wherever I want inside the scene and add color and add the material. And the nice thing, it's still linked, as I mentioned before. So when I would like to change the color afterwards, just go in here, maybe into a more blue. So it's really, really nice and interactive working with materials. Okay, so maybe the second material, I want something more like a metallic. So I drag this basic material. So these materials are possible to make by manually exactly the same. It's just some presets that are already made for you, so you have a starting point. And this metal, maybe I want this darker tone of blue. I really like the settings, maybe a little bit more rough, so it's not that clear in the reflections. And again, I'm picking the color and dropping it onto different objects into the scene.
That's also super fast.
Yeah, and really responsive. It's really, really nice working on that. Maybe just the middle one. So change the color here again. Okay. Edit here. The H. Where's the H? Here it is. Okay, so, and here I'm just adding some materials. And now let's maybe go down here into the more advanced materials.
Mm-hmm.
And a really good thing here is, but I mentioned that a little bit later. First, I want to maybe grab some nice frosty glass. I really like that, to get in more depth with the translucency of the glass, where I can see through the object.
We gave it a name. It's called Springer.
Springer.
Yeah, Springer. It's a spring in the kringle. It's a Springer.
The Springle. And now I'm just adding some colors. And now maybe create a new highlight color, maybe something a little bit more of a green tone to give it some highlights, maybe here. But the palm tree should be this one. So pick that, maybe add it here, here. And I'm just playing around with a little bit of different coloring, whatever feels right. There's no right or wrong. And this is what I really like about this tool here. You can get results pretty fast without really going back into the material.
How does it look like? How does it look like if you switch off ray tracing?
Like that.
Oh, okay.
You get an idea of the colors. So maybe to get a nice compositing, but especially shaders like the frosted glass or something. Maybe let's zoom in here. Only really work when you're in ray tracing, as it needs the program to really calculate the lights bouncing through, interacting with the surface, coming back out. So you can use it without ray tracing, maybe for coloring, but to get the final touch and the final look, usually inside ray tracing is a good thing. And also I'm just using a M1 MacBook 13-inch, so it's not like a maxed out machine or something. So you can, almost everybody really can work with that. So it's really optimized and really fast. So really great. So I'm just maybe pump up the light intensity a bit. Okay, now let's get into something really nice, and that's the substance materials. As you mentioned yesterday already, I think in Sampler and Painter, you created in Sampler your own substance material where you can change sliders to create like the material you really want. And the cool thing is these materials are actually exportable and then importable into Stager. Because usually, as you know, workflows with your usual 3D workflow with materials, you have, for example, let's go here. You have your material, or maybe let's create a new one, just to give an idea. You have, for examples, maps, so 3D maps, which are textures that you add onto the material to give it a much more natural look. For example, scratches, or let's go here, scratches or moss like it was yesterday, or water details. And you can do that still here. You can add some basic images, for example, for the roughness. I want to select the file. And here I have some maps prepared. And these are, for example, just some black and white values. And these values tell the program where it's black, it should be really glossy, and where it's white, it should be really rough. it's a nice feature, and it's basically how I would go on and texture my materials. But the thing is, now I only have an image. I can't really interact with it, maybe add some more scratches. I would have to go in there, click to edit, go to Photoshop, add some scratches, remove them, go back. And what's really nice here is as I mentioned earlier, the substance materials. Because, for example, here, you can see, like we had with the models, this little parametric icon. This means that you can still edit the material after you applied it. Like we had with the materials, for example, with the palm tree, where you can change the number of leaves or the scale. So let's maybe select something like the terrazzo, which is currently very popular in abstract 3D scenes. So I just drag it in here. And that's basically something created inside, or that could be created inside sample like you did yesterday. So you could create with filters like stone and change the values of the colors, how much stone is there. And when you export it as a substance material, you can tell which sliders you can manipulate inside other programs. So now it's just not a fixed texture like we had before with the scratches, for example. I can still change, for example, the colors of the inserts, or how many colors are there, or the variation of the colors, or the roughness of the colors. I can change the concrete material that's beneath there. Or there's also some presets here that can use. You can check the red terrazzo or the bluey gray terrazzo. So that's really nice because it gives you the option like we had before with the objects. Because usually, as I worked before, you can create your fixed texture, your fixed object, bring it in, render, and then maybe you think, oh, it would be nice if there's more variation or other colors, and would be really tricky to go back and forth inside the fixed PNG image or something like that. But with that, you have really variable materials, objects that you can still art direct here, because I could change the blue tone maybe to something like this blue, so it fits the scene, or maybe this is something like the green. Oh, sorry. Inside the material, I can use this one, maybe something like this green, and now it fits really the scene. And usually that's really tricky. That's what I really like about these substance materials. And also, if you want to try out more than these here, you can always click here and browse 3D assets in the marketplace. And you have a ton, I think thousands of materials that you can download, import. And there's still also something that are procedural. So like the terrazzo, you can change these. So often you can change the color, the amount of scratches, the style, or whatever. So maybe in the chat, if you want to try something out and maybe write it in there, which material I should change or
so Matthias, there's only about 9,358 materials to choose from. Actually, that's a good question, because people were asking for hang on, where it is, sprinkle with the sprinkle. It should be with rainbow sprinkles.
Oh, then maybe let's...
I don't know if you can find that texture. But speaking of color, there was a question from David. He asked if there are color management options inside Stager. Do you know anything about that?
Which option, sorry?
If there's if you can do color management in Stager, if you can, you know, create a profile or work with a profile or create a profile on export, or I don't know, to be honest. So
I don't know either. I think I'm not sure if it's with ACES in the background or just an sRGB space. It's actually a good point.
I can imagine it's sRGB, but
I think I think it's rendering in linear space, but I think the rest is just in export. It's just a normal sRGB, I think.
Right.
because it's there. There's not an option, as far as I know, to export in a linear space or something like that.
But you can export in 16-bit.
At least that, yeah. But still sRGB, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah. So now the Kringle has some rainbow sprinklers, but maybe we find something like rainbow. Let's search for rainbow. Ooh. Yeah, maybe that. So you can just search for it, download it, and that's the nice thing. And just drag and drop. So that's more like a rainbowy in terms of reflections, like from car paint or something. Just drag and drop. I'm not sure if this one is still parametric, because not all are parametric. So we can still change it, but let's see, maybe it is. Oh yeah, it is. And now here we also have some other presets. Now we have some, we can change the roughness. Maybe another preset. Randomize. Yeah, and that's how you use all the substance materials or materials inside to just play around with it, download some stuff. There are also lots of free assets inside the marketplace. So when you go here, also really high quality materials with great maps for displacement, like you see here in the rocks coming out, stylized stuff, not just photorealistic, like for the cliff, also like some atlases that you can scatter around your scene to give, for example, your floor a bit more depth, etc., etc. So just browse around, really fun stuff here, really great materials. So, and you can also create your own, as Robert showed yesterday, inside sample or Stager. You just export it, import it, play around, and
where do you work at? I work in import export. Keep the flat jokes alive.
Where button, yeah. So, also I forgot to mention, maybe we didn't see that before. When we're lighting, we see some shadows here. Maybe if I turn the sun a little bit, because I often like to use other objects to break up the scene a little bit in the lighting. As you can see here, the little shadows.
Adds total believability to it, I think.
Yeah, like you can see
more
here.
natural.
Yeah, exactly, because it's also like the bevel. It adds like a more natural feeling to it, less 3D. Perfect.
Although it is totally obvious that it's 3D, it still adds a little organic touch to it.
Yeah, exactly. And it just, as you can see here, it's just a palm tree I placed here. Although it's not visible in the scene, you can still see the shadows, and you could also use some gobo textures, which are so black and white textures that you can put on a plane, and use some opacity to just have the flat plane, place it inside your scene to get some really nice shadows onto it. And yeah, so basically that would be the final scene. The colors are a little bit mixed up now, but just for demonstration purposes, I think that works fine, as the final result should be looking something like this if we just use these materials. And now, when you're happy with the scene and how it's looking, the final step, as we discussed earlier, would be, after you're designing your scene, you go into the render tab or the render mode. And here you have different options for quality. Of course, it takes longer if you increase the samples or the noise level decreases. Here you can change the export name, where it's saved, also the depth of the colors. Even 32 bits is possible in Photoshop, which gives you the flexibility with color grading later, so it doesn't get clamped too much down with 8-bit. You can maybe erase those shadows or reduce the highlights. Also, you can export as a PNG. And here the cool thing is, because we used cameras, I can render multiple cameras at once. For example, I did this with the detail shots we have down here. For that, I didn't just move around again, positioned my camera, clicked render, moved again, clicked render. I just created multiple cameras, moved them around in a fixed place. And then with just one button, I can activate all the cameras I want to render. For example, if I add another camera for maybe something like that. When I'm in the render settings, now I see I have two cameras. And I can activate both, click render, and then both images are rendered.
How long does it take? Maybe you can render out like a thumbnail, like, you know, I don't know, 640 or 360 or something with low samples.
Let's try. I think the resolution is inside the camera. Let's take the camera 1. Let's take 740. Is it locked? No, it's not. But I also, if it takes too long, of course, prepared final rendered scene.
Yeah, we can always skip.
Yeah, exactly. When you click render here, you see, oh, yeah, it starts rendering, noise gets reduced. Also, you get two files, which I can show you later on. One is also further noise reduced, so it's really clean and really nice. And okay, it
will take about 7 minutes. And it's and you know, with rendering, I mean, no matter how fast your machine is or how many GPUs or CPUs you have, rendering is never fast enough, because even if it's fast, you just up the resolution or the samples. So at the end of the day, you will always have to wait. I mean, we had to wait for renders 10 years ago, and the machines are, I don't know, 100 times faster, and we're still waiting for renders because, you know, now we have it in 4K and, you know, even more photorealistic. And so it's always a good idea to strategically plan your rendering times. So let's say end of the day, so you can render overnight. Or if you want to, you know, crank out a couple of previews, you would do like a low resolution, low sample preset that you can, you know, start when you are grabbing lunch or go on a coffee break.
Exactly, yeah.
So the machine works for you while you are resting or, you know, do other stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Especially when you're rendering like thousands of frames for an animation or something like that, or here with multiple cameras, it as I said, although the computing power gets stronger, the people want more resolution, more samples. Yes. So it just stays about the same how much you need for one frame. And after you rendered it from Stager, you get if you check the option Photoshop file, you get a nice rendered Photoshop file, even with some additional layers, which might look funky a little bit, but come in really handy. For example, the material layer here lets you select different materials like we had in Stager. So you can make further manipulations. For example, if we go to select and maybe say color range and maybe select this color and press OK, and maybe add a curves adjustment layer, put it out. And then we deactivate the layers so that they are not for visual purposes, just for selection purposes, for further manipulation. And now the nice thing is I just selected this blue material. So when I manipulate the curves, you can see I can still manipulate it in post. So you have, additionally to the flexibility inside the materials in Stager, you have it also here in your post-production where you can still mess around a little bit, maybe with the colors. So really nice point here because a render really never is final, for me at least, when you render it out, although there are lots of possibilities now with renderers with post effects or something like that, where you can really dial in the look inside the program. I almost always put it inside After Effects or Photoshop to give it the final edge or final look, or maybe add some chromatic aberration like you have with the cameras and the edges, or maybe a little bit of depth of field. Good point. I forgot that actually, because as you can see here, we have a little bit of depth of field. We have to focus here. That's out of focus. It's just one button. Super easy inside your camera. You can activate depth of field, set the focus point. Maybe look inside the camera.
I think it will be even more obvious if you are going closer on something with some more separation.
Maybe this one isn't closer. So maybe if I set the focus point here, crank up the blur amount, and now you have, just for demonstration purposes, a nice blur. Also cranks up the render time, of course, like everything you do additionally will take up render time, especially some materials like translucent materials or subsurface scattering materials, etc. But yeah, and that's basically my whole workflow, from getting like a simple scene, from the first step of creating like a simple object to creating lighting, the materials, putting inside Photoshop, give it a final touch, and maybe use it further for like a poster design, add some additional topography or something like that, or yeah. That's it. And maybe now you think I tried to build it up like you could follow it, even if you don't maybe know some 3D stuff. So maybe some of you guys out there are now motivated to try out some stuff, or maybe like 36 days of type or something.
The chat was very active. I was quite busy answering a couple of questions. You saw me typing away.
Thank you.
A little bit distracted. But yeah, I think people enjoyed it quite a bit, and certainly you inspired and gave some new thoughts on how to do things. And I mean, I learned a lot as well, because I'm just very basic knowledge of Stager personally, but I think it's quite intriguing on how fast. I mean, I know you could work fast with it, but I mean, some of the things that you showed today are quite amazing. For little things, it can be very helpful. Not always to use massive tools like Cinema 4D. For most of the stuff, I will still use that, of course. But for maybe quick mock-ups or something, this is quite amazing on how fast it works, and especially having the option what you showed right now with the puzzle mats to do stuff in post-production. I think a lot of people maybe underestimate the amount of work that should go in after the render has finished, right? Because the render only takes you here, or here, but to go from here to here, usually that's achieved in post-production, adding imperfections, adding the final color grade, adding a little bit of I don't know, maybe grain or something to that, a little bit of highlights, a little bit of glow, things that are easier to manipulate on a final image, as you would do maybe with a raw image that you took a photo. You would certainly use some time to give it the final polish to make it look really stand out.
Yeah, exactly. Perfectly summarized, as already said. And yeah, that's what it makes also so nice here, that you get all the options like the puzzle mat, the simple results, and imperfections possibility with the materials and all the other stuff. So yeah, it was really a blast working with you guys on this project, and really glad to be here also on the UK stream and to show you a little bit of Stager and maybe dive into it another time. We'll see.
Absolutely. It was good fun. Again, lots of positive feedback. Linda says it's a great session. Tim says glow. Doris thanks us. So does David, Angus, Sean, Oliver. They were all really happy with how the stream went. So am I. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you, Matthias, for this wonderful stream. A big round of applause for your first UK stream, which was wonderful, I believe. So hope to see you soon in this channel as well. Quick look out for Friday. Friday will be covering Adobe Express, and I think the topic is a recipe card, if I'm not mistaken. So tune in on Friday to check that out. And I hope to see you next time, sometime soon, not sure when. But stay tuned and have everyone a wonderful day, and keep on rendering and stay creative.
Thanks, guys. Bye. Have a nice week.
Bye.